props to the Chiefs. I feel like we're going to be saying that rinse and repeat for the next 15 years of my sports career because Patrick Mahomes is just that good. And, the Chiefs fans have got such an embarrassment of sports riches to have him and be able to root for him for the next, 15 years or whatnot of their time. But to me, as you kind of start to look forward here, a couple of stories I didn't dive into as much as I wanted to. One of them, and I'm going to unpack this in a big way tomorrow. How about the Heisman Trophy race being impacted potentially by games just getting canceled? And I kind of loved Dabo Swinney calling out Florida State for that decision not to play the game when the ACC said it was fine to play and the team had already traveled. All of Clemson was already there in Tallahassee. It's one thing if you call a game off a couple of days in a row, but once you've already allowed the team to make a trip out of their market and they're already at the stadium with some of their employees 3 hours until kickoff, and you suddenly say, hey, the game's not going to happen when the ACC is fine with it being played, I think there's going to be some bad blood going forward over the way that this decision came down. And again, to me, very few people will actually talk about this, but Dr. Sills, the NFL's lead doctor expert, said that there's not a single case of COVID being spread from play anywhere in the world that they are aware of. So because Clemson had a backup offensive lineman test positive for COVID on Friday, and they immediately isolated him, and he wasn't going to be able to play, the odds of Florida State actually being under duress or danger from this were virtually zero. So if they had wanted to play that football game, they could have played that football game. And I'm curious how this is going to shake out now because the comments basically that Dabo made it seem very clear that Clemson's not going to be willing to go back on the road, back to Florida State to play. And frankly, I don't know what they have to gain by playing that game against Florida State, what would now have to be the week before the ACC championship game. They know they're a lot better than Florida State. They were a 35-point favorite. What do they have to prove? If they win their next couple of games, then they're in the ACC championship game against Notre Dame. And if they win that game, they'll be in the playoff. And so I don't see it as being a very difficult situation at all for Clemson going forward. That's a little bit of a complicated story. The BYU drama. Who's BYU going to play? Will they really play anybody everywhere? Play anybody wherever? Look, I gave credit to BYU, and I continue to, because when everybody in the Mountain West time zone and everybody in the Pacific time zone said, we're not playing college football this year, and they all quit and canceled their season, their games against BYU, BYU had to build an entirely new schedule. And they, I believe, BYU, need to get a couple of more talented teams on the schedule if it's possible. And so I understand their demand and the fact that they'll play anybody anywhere, which is basically what they tweeted. But this whole mess of trying to get games scheduled the week of is a big challenge. But I think if you're BYU or you're Cincinnati and you really want to end up in a situation where you're being considered for one of these playoff bids, if things break in your way, then you have to get a couple of these games scheduled like now, right? Where somebody suddenly has an opening. The Pac-12 has now said, hey, we can have non-conference games. And I think if you're BYU, you have to leap at every single opportunity you get there. I don't see how it can be remotely difficult at all to make the decision about whether or not you're going to play. All this to say, great games, phenomenal day in the NFL. As I said earlier, 3 big games. The Ravens hosting the Titans. My Titans got a huge win. We had a huge win for the Colts against the Packers. Both of those games went to overtime, and then it almost went to overtime with a monumental win for the Chiefs, avenging their only defeat so far this year. Patrick Mahomes is a bad, bad man and continues to dominate,